Joining us now, Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. He's a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. But today we talk about guns and gun reform. And you were there. You were so moved by Sandy Hook, and you've been fighting ever since. But what has moved the meter, if anything?
I can't believe it's been almost 10 years since Sandy Hook. And listen, we have had a lot of successes. We've changed a lot of state laws, but of course, we haven't moved the needle federally. And the fact of the matter is, unless you enact gun legislation on a national level, you can't make a big difference here. In New York State, 75% of the illegal guns that are used in crimes come from outside of New York. They come from states that have loose background check laws where criminals can go and buy as many guns as they want online or at a gun store, load them in the back of their van, and then sell them illegally in places like New York City and Buffalo. States that have tougher background checks laws have lower rates of crime. That's just the truth of the matter. So until we pass federal legislation, even in states like New York that have relatively tougher gun laws, are going to still be on the front lines of this epidemic. And it's just beyond me why people don't listen to folks like Catherine, who have been crying out for common sense federal legislation supported by 80%, 90% of Americans. My hope is that we'll have an opportunity over the next week or so to try to once again find some common ground, once again bring a vote to the floor of the Senate and see if we can move the needle. This is just our choice as a nation to allow this level of slaughter. There's no other nation in the high-income world that has anything like what happens in the United States. And the reason is primarily because we choose to allow this nation to be awash, not just in guns, but in these high-powered military-style guns that are designed for mass killings like what we saw in Buffalo.
Well, Senator, it's so often whenever somebody starts talking about gun safety laws, you have people on the far right talking about how it's radical, how it's an issue that divides Americans, it splits Americans down the middle. You know better than anybody that after Sandy Hook, the support for expanded universal background checks, the expanded background checks for guns, shot up to 90%. It stayed around 80, 90%. The support for stronger red flag laws has gone up. The support for checking into backgrounds for people with mental health problems like the shooter in Buffalo has shot up. And what you're talking about right now is not taking guns away from citizens that use them legally, that have them legally. I don't think Americans understand that the overwhelming majority of crimes that are committed with guns are used by people who didn't buy those guns from a gun store. They got them illegally. So what in the hell is wrong with us stopping criminals from getting guns illegally to commit other acts of crime?
So, when I get in conversations with gun rights supporters in Connecticut, they often start adversarial. And then I say to them, listen, what about background checks? Don't you support background checks? And that person who is sort of approaching me aggressively, thinking that we're in fundamental disagreement, almost always says, well, yeah, of course I support background checks. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you trying to take my guns away. I believe the Second Amendment protects the right of every individual to be able to own a firearm, period, stop. But the reason that there's 90% agreement in this country on just making sure that everybody goes through a background check before they buy a gun is because nobody, including gun owners, wants criminals to be able to own guns. And the reality is that is the primary reason why rates of violence are so high in some parts of our country, because lots of criminals still have guns. Now, we should also have a conversation, Joe, about why any law-abiding citizen needs a 30-round magazine clip or a 100-round drum of ammunition. Those are the tools of mass shooters. To protect your home or to hunt or shoot for sport, a 10-round magazine will do you just fine. So there are lots of conversations that have broad consensus in this country. And the reason that we're not able to get votes in the Senate is not because there's a lack of consensus, but because in the Republican Party right now, they still need that NRA stamp of approval to win a primary. And until they figure out another way to be able to demonstrate their conservative bona fides other than the gun lobby's support, we're going to be a little bit stuck.
Senator, good morning. This is such a frustrating conversation, I'm sure, for so many people who watch our show to say, here we are again trying to get something done. And as you say, there have been some things done in states across the country, but by and large, we keep seeing these incidents. And as you know, the vast majority of these mass shooters do buy their guns legally. The Department of Justice says 77% of them buy them legally. Let's take the case of this 18-year-old in Buffalo, walks into a sporting store in upstate New York, passes an instant background check, gets his Bushmaster semi-automatic rifle, makes those illegal modifications, and goes out and kills 10 people in a supermarket. Red flag law maybe should have been in place, but he wrote something on a test in high school that sounded some alarms, but he said he was joking, so it didn't register. What do you do about a case like his? Let's just take the one in front of us. Where should the intervention have been here?
Well, first of all, we used to have a broad federal ban on these types of weapons, and it's not coincidental that during the 10-year period of time that we had a federal restriction on assault weapons, we saw a dramatic reduction in mass shootings. We also, during that time, didn't allow for you to buy these 30-round magazines. These mass shooters get some kind of perverse false confidence when they are able to get their hands on these video game weapons. I just wonder whether in Newtown, Adam Lanza would have ever walked into that school if he couldn't have in his possession that high-powered rifle with those big magazines. So we do need federal legislation, and we have proof that it works. But I also just think there's a moral signal sent when Congress does nothing year after year. I mean, I'm not agnostic as to what Congress should do, but I think every single year that we do nothing, we are sending this unintentional but real signal of endorsement to would-be mass killers. Their brains are breaking, and when they see Congress doing zero to send a signal of moral condemnation to these acts, they perceive it as a green light. So, listen, I think there's policies that work, like bans on assault weapons, but I also think that every year we do nothing, it's unfortunately driving these numbers upwards.
Eugene Daniels.
Senator Eugene Daniels here. Good to see you. You know, one of the things that almost every mass shooting has in common is that they're all very multifaceted. Here we have access to guns, we have possibly some mental health issues, but more importantly, I think, and you know, the president's going to talk about this later today, you also have this obsession with white supremacy and the replacement theory, this racist replacement theory. So how do senators, how does Congress, how does the White House attack such a multifaceted issue? Because at this point, it seemed to stymie not just because of the lack of movement on gun control, but the lack of movement on these other issues as well.
Yeah, I do think it's important for us to just take a second and talk about the very clear trend line in mass shootings in this country. 75% of extremist shootings in this country are committed by white supremacists. And you see this through line from El Paso to Charleston to Buffalo, in which white supremacists who feed off of this online conversation about the replacement theory, fed by mainstream conservative and Republican institutions, are turning their anger into mass violence. And so this is a moment for my friends in the Republican Party who more than occasionally endorse these hateful theories about replacement to stop it. To stop it, to stand down, to condemn this kind of talk, to stop suggesting that Muslims or immigrants or black people or Jews are a threat to society. Because every time that they say things like that on the Senate floor, every time they go on Fox News and repeat that lie, they are unfortunately feeding this river of racist ideology into the brains of people who are contemplating mass violence. And I know that's not the intention of my Republican colleagues, but they've just got to be really careful about the things that they say right now.